Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. A special thanks to our co-chairs today for this event, the Honorable Kevin Lynch and Ms. Annette Verschan, and of course, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So yesterday I took the first flight from Ottawa to Billy Bishop Airport with a set of remarks in my briefcase. And in those remarks was a section on the extraordinary cooperation between our two countries and the friendship that is the basis for that cooperation. Today, considering the events over the past few days, and before I say anything else, I want to extend my heartfelt sympathies to the families of those who were killed and injured in the events yesterday in Ottawa and in Quebec earlier this week. Our two countries deplore acts of violence toward military, government, law enforcement officials, and we, the United States, stand ready to assist our Canadian partners as they investigate this event. Most importantly, I want to reiterate our continuing support for the people of Canada during this difficult time. The U.S. and Canada enjoy one of the most comprehensive partnerships between any two nations in the world today. In a world of new and ever more difficult challenges, our two countries stand shoulder to shoulder. From our shared commitment to NATO, to our mutual support of Ukraine, to our work on countering ISIL, and working to stem the spread of Ebola. We are partners and we are allies. Of course, though, I know you're here mainly to hear about our fantastic economic relationship and how we can make it better. So in the spirit of moving forward, I am going to talk about our economy. The U.S.-Canada relationship is the largest, most efficient, most integrated, most dynamic, and most important bilateral economic relationship in the entire world. When you have two economies and countries as linked and like-minded as ours, there's no doubt that what benefits one benefits the other. Look at this closely, and the details are surprising, even to seasoned experts. You see, the top-line figure we often use to describe the size of the relationship is a two-way trade of goods and services, which last year totaled $735 billion. That's $2 billion a day. Now, we throw these types of figures around all the time. But how does that compare with our other trading relationships? Well, the U.S. and Canada engage in about as much merchandise trade each day as Canada and France do in 2 months. Our annual two-way merchandise trade is greater than the total annual economic output of all but 20 countries of the world, and that includes Canada and the United States. Oh, here's a great one. The growth, just the growth, in Canada's merchandise trade with the United States since 2009, it exceeds Canada's annual trade with China, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea combined. One more that's particularly relevant for you. If you look at just Ontario, it would displace Japan as the United States' fourth largest trading partner. Canada has a thriving and successful economy that weathered the global recession with singular success. And I know you are very proud of this, and rightly so. When you do well, we do well, and vice versa. So let's talk about the United States and how we're doing after a few tough years. 10 million plus jobs have been created since the crisis. 10 million. That's more than the 9 million that was lost because of it. The unemployment rate has dropped from its peak of 10% in October 2009 to 5.9% today. I remember so distinctly being at the president's swearing in January of 2009, and we were losing about 800,000 jobs a month. And here we are, now 55 months, we have enjoyed the longest uninterrupted streak of monthly private job growth since we began taking records. And amazingly, the manufacturing sector, long thought to be in permanent decline due to global competition from low-wage countries, we're adding jobs. 700,000 since 2010. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. New vehicle sales in the U.S., so important to both of our economies. It plummeted to 10.4 million in 2009. Yet this year, they will likely well exceed 16 million. Consumer confidence, it is increasing, and it's helping housing as well. And our federal budget deficit, it's dropped from almost 10% of GDP, that was in 2009, to a projected 2.8% this year, and down 29% from last year. In 2010, virtually every state in the United States was in deficit. Today, a majority of states are now running surpluses. The equity markets, even with corrections, have been booming, and many corporations are flush with cash. The banking sector is strong, well capitalized, and yes, much better regulated. This is all critical on a global scale because the US GDP is about $17 trillion. So let's do a little math. Just 3 years. If we grow 3 years of 3% growth in the US, our GDP will be like adding another Australia, the 12th largest economy in the world. And critical on a local scale, expanding Ontario's goods exports to the US by just 10% would be the equivalent of expanding Ontario's exports to China sixfold. That is the good news story of rebuilding the American economy. And of course, there's a lot left to do. The fruits of our economy and our recovery have not yet reached everyone. Some have done very well in the recovery, but too many are still struggling. And the U.S. administration is focused on addressing those struggles. There are still millions of our fellow citizens looking for work, especially among the disadvantaged and minority groups. Middle-class wages, while yes, improving, have much further to go. And in many places, women still earn less than their male counterparts for the same work. The gap between rich and poor is intolerably wide and damaging, I believe, to our society. And we need to invest more. We need to invest in our infrastructure and our education and training. And we need immigration and tax reform. And yes, we need to address climate change and other environmental threats. Yes, we have more work to do. But we're not sitting still, and we never do. What I'm focused on in Canada is not only to help foster closer ties and stronger relations between our best friends and neighbors. I'm focused on helping create ever more opportunities for economic benefit for both of our citizens. So how do we keep growing our economies from here? And how can we expand and strengthen our relationship further? The factors driving the U.S. economy, or any economy for that matter, are complex. And I think the bottom line is that if we support and reward creativity, risk-taking, and innovation, as both Canada and the U.S. do, we will continue to power through inevitable setbacks, including even major financial crises. But perhaps no factor is more important in driving economic growth than innovation. Remember that the financial crisis and economic crisis in the United States and the world occurred during a period of incredible technological innovation. Your smartphone and all of its amazing powers should remind you of that every few minutes. Look, we get instant directions, up-to-the-minute traffic reports, access and disseminate information in real time over multiple platforms from and to virtually anyone on the planet. And when you post a picture of your lunch today for your friends on Facebook, you should think about the technological changes. So let me give you a few more examples. Speaking of Facebook, It's hard to believe that Facebook started its incredible rise only a few years before the financial crisis. In August of 2008, Facebook had 100 million users. It now has more than 1 billion users and a market capitalization of $200 billion. A company worth the same as GM, Ford, and Boeing combined, having risen largely during and after the financial crisis. Oh, on Twitter, I hope you're following me on Twitter, at Bruce A. Heyman. But guess what? Twitter was barely even existed before the crisis, and a few people had ever heard of it. In a recent conference call, though, with analysts, Twitter's CEO said that during just the Germany-Brazil World Cup game this summer, there were nearly 6.5 billion tweet impressions. That is, tweets put out during that match were potentially viewed 6.5 billion times across the world. Now, of course, internet companies are real easy examples. But who would have thought that after 155 years from that famous Drake well in Pennsylvania, the U.S. oil and gas industry would undergo a revolution? And again, right through the crisis. Remember the manufacturing jobs numbers I gave you before? 700,000 new manufacturing jobs? Well, a major factor of that increase in U.S.-based manufacturing, perhaps the major, is the astounding growth in U.S. natural gas production and the consequent plummeting of U.S. gas prices. Well, of course, Russia has a lot of gas too, but you don't see everyone setting up manufacturing plants there. The U.S., like Canada, offers a package of rule of law, stability, intellectual property, rights protections, and quality of life that makes us an attractive place to invest. But the natural gas boom, directly resulting from innovations in drilling techniques, was clearly a big driver in those investments. And I'm sure you've heard that those same techniques have resulted in an oil boom as well, with U.S. production long in decline, now rising sharply beginning, you guessed it, 2009. And despite all that production growth, and proven reserves have expanded significantly as well. That's the marvel of technology applied to free markets. Now, these examples aren't about oil and gas production, and don't get me wrong, they're not about the growth of Facebook or Twitter. No, they're about the power of innovation to create value. And they emphasize that innovation is constant. Crises don't stop economies like ours, the US or Canada. And the great economic news coming out of the US is great news for Canada as well. Why? Because we already discussed, our economies are inextricably linked, and our economic relationship is so much more vast and extensive than any other. Much of our manufacturing occurs in processes that cross the border, with some auto parts, for example, crossing the border a half a dozen or more times before a car is even produced. From 2009 to 2013, Canadian exports to the United States rose 47%. And in the first 7 months of this year, they're up another 5% over 2013. Since 2009, the stock of U.S. investment in Canada has risen by $93 billion, or 34%. I can't repeat it enough. There's no more important economic partnership for either of us. When your biggest customer, trading partner, and friend is doing well, that's good news for you. But as I pointed out, we have work to do. What I'd really like to see, and you all need to help us, is for our governments to move even more quickly, not only to foster innovation, but to innovate and use the latest innovations to improve the lives of our citizens. Our two governments are working hard to identify and implement ideas and mechanisms to make it easier for us to do business together, so our economies can grow together. What we need to do, what we seek to do, is to take that same spirit of innovation that the private sector is so good at harnessing and apply it to our borders, apply it to our regulatory processes, apply it to our communications that we have with our citizens. Through our bilateral work at Beyond the Border Initiative and the Regulatory Cooperation Council, We're looking at a myriad of ways to strengthen our shared security at the perimeter and align regulatory regimes in order to ease the movement of legitimate goods, ease travel across our common border, and make it easier for companies to comply with regulations in our respective countries. The goal of these efforts and trade negotiations and numerous other formal and informal channels of communications between our governments and among our citizens and businesses is to make it easy for you and your companies to do what you do best: create opportunities, create wealth, create jobs for our citizens. Please visit Beyond the Border and Regulatory Cooperation websites to learn about these and other initiatives, but contribute your ideas. Be a part of the working groups. Now, one of those ideas is a binational working group at the Great Lakes regional level, focused on trade, innovation, prosperity, and we've already begun acting on it. Our consulate in Toronto, under the leadership of Consul General Jim Dickmeyer, has collaborated on a binational webinar on the topic of facilitating cross-border travel. The webinar is just the first act of the partnership with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Our governments are here to serve you, and your input is deeply valued. So I want to leave you today with 4 points that I hope that I've adequately expressed. First, our bilateral economic relationship is vast and deep. Second, there's great news about the U.S. economy, which is being propelled by innovation, and it marches on. Third, the great news about the U.S. economy is great news for Canada because, well, back to point 1, our bilateral economic relationship is vast and deep. And 4, our governments are working hard to grow our economies and our economic relationship to provide even greater and more widespread benefits to our citizens, and we need you to help guide us. Oh, one more thing. In the past several weeks, a string of high-level, including cabinet-level U.S. officials, has come to Canada. The U.S. Secretary of Energy met with Canadian counterparts and stakeholders in Ottawa just over a month ago. This was followed by a visit from the Secretary of Homeland Security, and then the administrators for NASA and NOAA. Just this morning, I spoke to our Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, who called me from South Korea just to check in, and she let me know she's looking forward to coming to Ottawa and Toronto next week. Just further evidence of how connected our two countries are and how important Canada is to the United States, and I anticipate there will be more. So thank you very much. I hope the rest of the summit is productive for you and that you leave here as optimistic, energized, and committed as I am to strengthening even further the extraordinary U.S.-Canada relationship. Thank you.